Welcome back to Horrors Worldwide. Today, I'm going to explain a psychological horror movie called Rosemary's Baby, released in 1968. Spoilers ahead, watch out and stay safe. Based on a novel of the same name by Ira Levin, the story of Rosemary's Baby is about a young married couple, Rosemary and Guy Woodhouse. After the marriage, the couples find an apartment in Manhattan, New York, to start their beautiful life together. But their friend and current landlord of the property tries to dissuade them from doing so because the building has a rather unsavory past. It has been occupied by cannibal killers, Satanists, and witches before them. Rosemary falls in love with her new apartment and decides to move in anyway. Rosemary is estranged from her family because of marrying a Jewish boy. So, her life in New York is all she has, and dedicated entirely to being a housewife for her husband, whom she adores. Her husband, a struggling actor, starts to find more work and earns more money. Their new neighbors welcome them and treat them just like family. Rosemary and Guy are frequently visited by their new neighbors, the cassavetes, who play a very important role in the story as it carries on. Minnie Cassavet is the most involved of all the neighbors and often barges into their apartment with little to no notice, slowly stripping Rosemary of her peace and independence as the film goes on. But then suddenly, Guy decides he wants to become a father. Evidently, having studied her ovulation cycle himself, he announces the ideal baby night. That evening, Minnie drops by to give them some chocolate. Rosemary complains of its chalky taste, but Guy gets angry over her ingratitude. She eats part of it, and then furtively hides the rest on her napkin. After the dinner, Rosemary feels disoriented and passes out. In her sleep, she has a bizarre dream. Rosemary is floating on a mattress in the sea and gliding across the Sistine Chapel. Guy takes off her clothes and carries her to another room. A group of old and naked people, including the cassavetes, perform a sinister ritual on her naked body. In her half-consciousness, she hears a voice saying, "You got her too high." Then, Guy makes love to her and transforms into some kind of black crusty birdman. The next morning, when Rosemary wakes up, she is sore and scratched. Guy half-heartedly apologizes for the lovemaking while she was out. Rosemary is angry, but baby night later proves successful. Later, when Rosemary is pregnant, Minnie insists that she consumes the mysterious drinks that Minnie makes her, for her all under the guise of giving her nutrients for the baby. Minnie also gives Rosemary a strange necklace for good luck, which turns out to do more harm than good. But these warnings are all cleverly disguised and hidden under fake smiles and welcoming gestures. Over the course of the film, not only does Rosemary physically change, becoming sicker and weaker as her unnatural pregnancy runs its course, but she also undergoes an emotional transformation. It becomes obvious that nobody is on Rosemary's side. No one will help her, not even her husband. If she wants to save herself and her baby, then she has to do it alone. To come out of all that loneliness, Rosemary decides to throw a party for her young friends and insists that they will not invite the cassavetes. Her friends Alyssa, Joan Jellicoe, and Tiger Honigson tell her she looks awful and that her pain is far from normal. Rosemary tells Guy that she needs to see a doctor. They both fight bitterly over it, but at the last minute, she relents. The pain has suddenly stopped and she can now feel the baby kicking. One day, Rosemary's friend, Hutch, drops by for a visit. Roman Cassavet and Minnie Cassavet spot him and inform Guy about the friend's visit. Guy rushes back to the apartment. Hutch asks a lot of questions of Roman and Guy and leaves the apartment. Later, Hutch falls into a mysterious coma and dies. Rosemary receives a book from Hutch's companion, which Hutch has intended to give her personally. It's called All of Them Witches, a study on witchcraft through the ages. As the story continues, Rosemary slowly begins to suspect that her neighbors are not who they appear to be. She becomes suspicious, withdrawn, and fiercely protective of her baby. Hence, she visits Dr. Saperstein and tells him she will have no more to do with them. But the doctor tells her Roman is dying and would like to go away to Europe on a farewell tour. Rosemary feels guilty about her suspicions and when the time comes, bids them a fond farewell. She learns one strange thing after the other. Now the suspicion turns towards her husband Guy. She also learns that witches use the belongings of their intended victims to make them blind or kill them. On a hunch, she contacts Guy's former rival, Donald Baumgart, and gets him to reveal that Guy swapped neckties with him just before he went blind. Distraught, Rosemary goes to Dr. Saperstein to tell him what she has learned. But this secretary reveals something horrible to Rosemary, that the doctor sometimes smells like tannis root, which Rosemary knew as commonly called devil's pepper. Isolating herself from her husband, friends, doctors, and neighbors, Rosemary takes it upon herself to protect her unborn child and tries to seek outside help. She calls another doctor from a payphone on the street and persuades him to see her. This is the first moment where Rosemary acts completely on her own, following her own wishes and ignoring advice from others. Up until this point in the film, she's been listening to the advice of her doctor, husband, and neighbors. When she reveals her suspicions to Dr. Hill, he seems to take her seriously and gives her a sedative to help her sleep. She becomes horrified when she awakens and finds that Guy and Dr. Saperstein have arrived to take her back home, and Dr. Hill is not stopping them. Rosemary tries to fight them off, but they force her down on her bed, while Saperstein injects her with a sedative. When she wakes, Guy tells her they had a baby boy and that he is fine. Later, Dr. Saperstein tells her that the baby is dead. The coven members sit with Rosemary and collect her breast milk. Rosemary hears a baby crying through the walls of the apartment. She understands that they have taken the baby, and she thinks they are planning to sacrifice it for one of their rituals. After a few days of pretending to cooperate with them, Rosemary arms herself with a sharp butcher knife and finds the partition between her apartment and the apartment of the Cassavetes. She enters the room and sees an oil painting of a burning church on the wall, whispering, "You got her too high," apparently having a flashback of the dream. She discovers the entire coven, including Roman and Minnie, sitting in the living room. Some of them have come from far places. She approaches the bassinet, which is adorned with an inverted cross, and sees the baby for the first time. Guy finally tells her that he made an agreement with the coven to allow them to impregnate Rosemary with the spawn of the devil, in return for a successful acting career. Rosemary spits in his face and sinks into a chair. Roman speaks more gently to her and encourages her to be the baby's mother and does not need to join their evil coven. Rosemary hesitates at first, but her maternal instinct wins and she approaches the bassinet. She tells the witch rocking the bassinet that she is doing it too fast. The witch protests at first until Roman orders her to leave the crib. Rosemary begins to rock the baby slowly and sings to it. It was inevitable right from the beginning. Rosemary was never given a chance to decide for herself when she wanted to conceive a baby. The choice was made for her without her permission or her consent. And even though it was not her husband who assaulted her, he did something far worse. He betrayed her and then pretended with a smile that he still loved her. Though much of the film consists of scenes of Rosemary's dismissed, ignored, or lied to, female empowerment remains at the forefront of the story. Mothers are expected to be quiet, nurturing, and to accept their fate with grace and compliance. In the final moments of the film, Rosemary is completely silent. She has literally lost her voice and her right to choose. She finally gives in to the role that has been forced upon her. Her independence fades away as the film ends, not with begging and screaming, but with soft and sweet silence.